Hello, everybody. It's Amanda Gananiger with Progress Texas. Today I'm with Advocacy Manager Diana Gomez, Communications Manager Wesley Story, and Executive Director Ed Espinoza. It's been a weird week at the Capitol. We're not sure if it's been too quiet or too loud, but there were some deadlines that hit, and we're going to be talking about chubbing today. But before we get started on that fun word, I want to know from y'all, Diana, starting with you, the CDC announced that fully vaccinated adults can go maskless. What are you most excited about to go do in the post-pandemic world?
I'm excited to try and find more excuses to stay inside. I really wish there was a countdown the CDC had to let me know that this was coming. It's gonna take a while to be okay with some maskless folks, but yeah, putting up boundaries. I'll figure that out.
Ed, what about you?
I think for me, it's getting out and going places with other people. Like I've been doing patio dining and stuff, and it's always like keeping your distance, keeping your mask on. And, sometimes you see people in public and you know them, but you can't recognize them because the mask, like, oh, hey, nice to see you. How are the kids? Person says, I don't have any kids. I'm like, I'm sorry, I thought you were somebody else. So getting to socialize with people in a way where I can physically recognize them, that I think is what I'm looking forward to.
Wes, what about you?
So I agree with Diana. I trust the CDC, but I'll still be wearing my mask for the foreseeable future. But in the not so near future, one of the things that I'm most excited about is traveling. One of my friends lives in New York and I haven't seen her in a really long time. And we're finally at the stage where we're beginning conversations about a potential trip. It's not going to happen for a little while, but it's finally reaching that point to where maybe we'll be comfortable here in the next few months or so. So I'm excited about that.
One thing I'm really excited about talking about today is chubbing. And you brought some show and tell even for this.
I did, just to mark the special occasion. So at Tom's Market here in Austin, which is our local organic corner grocer, has something by Oscar Blues Brewery called Old Chub. And I will be enjoying the Old Chub here on the show with us today. Chubbing, by the way, I tried this last night. I got two so I could test one ahead of time. This is delicious Scotch ale. I had no idea that I would like Old Chub so much, but if you can see it, a nice brown color. Shall I describe chubbing, or shall we?
Please do. Describe chubbing as you chub your chub.
So chubbing at the Texas legislature is what would otherwise be called a filibuster. But the legislature doesn't have filibustering. The Senate does. In the legislature, they have basically time allotments to talk about certain bills. And chubbing is where you talk about the bill. It has to be about the bill, it has to be relevant, to use up as much time as possible to slow down the process. And when you slow down the process, you slow down the clock. Everything has to be done by a certain time. And last night at midnight was the time that all certain bills had to pass on first reading. Bills have to pass up to 3 readings, depending on how many votes they get. And if a bill didn't make first reading by last night, that bill was dead. And there was a lot of chubbing going on in the legislature last night. The history of the word goes back to the 1950s, but I don't really know how they came up with that word. I don't think any other legislative body in America uses it. Can't imagine why. But some good stuff died last night, and I think we'll talk more about that today. In the meantime, I'm going to enjoy Old Chub.
Chug the chub.
Delicious.
Wes, what are some of the ones that actually made it past this kind of crazy deadline?
Yeah, so there were actually a few good bills, which I'm super excited to talk about because I know a lot of the time on this podcast, we tend to discuss terrible things that are happening in the legislature because it's just so often that terrible things are happening, but we had some good news last night. And so I'll just kind of list off a few of the good bills that passed. Bo's Law was one of them. This is a law focused on more accountability for law enforcement. It sets standards for how and when police should keep their body cameras on. And this bill was actually in response to the killing of Botham Jean in Dallas. And so that was a great piece of legislation that got passed, and it was there in the last couple of hours ahead of the deadline. HB 1971 was also a really good criminal justice bill that passed. It would require Texas to install air conditioning in state-run jails and prisons, which is not currently the case. There are a lot of prisons in our state that don't have air conditioning, and inmates experience all kinds of health risks because of that. This is something that folks have been working on for years to get passed in the legislature, and so it still needs to be passed in the Senate, but we're at least taking steps toward getting this done and there being a change. And then the very last bill that passed was by Representative Aaron Zwiener. It was HB 48, and it would define sexual harassment as an unlawful employment practice. It was really exciting. You know, the last few minutes of before the deadline hits, lawmakers are kind of going wild. There's a lot of shouting, a lot of just because they're going through the bills so quickly. So we weren't sure who was going to be last. But it was a really great moment when Aaron Zwiener was able to go. And, you know, when they go up to describe their bill, they have to speak really quickly because they want to get a vote on it and get it in before the deadline. And so literally Aaron was just like, sexual harassment unlawful. And then the bill was passed.
What more is there to say, right?
Yeah, we got the point across.
It's a great summary.
Yeah, it looks so wild seeing everybody try to rush in those last bills. I believe I'm not 100% sure exactly what happened, but I think one of the last bills had to do with dogs somehow, and all of a sudden some of the representatives started barking. It looked like just it was wild.
Really?
Yeah.
I missed that.
There was a random point of order that was called on the bill too, and some of the reps were not happy about that because, you know, they're trying to get their bills passed and a point of order just takes up more time. But you're right, some of the folks were barking.
Wow.
But I mean,
I wish I could say I was surprised, but completely not surprising at the Texas legislature. Probably not the first time there's been barking on the floor of the legislature by members either.
yeah,
I was telling Amanda, I was also surprised by, there were a lot of folks in the House gallery who were just there to watch the end of this unfold. And I was surprised by that. You know, sometimes I was watching from home and the video will pan out and show the folks who are sitting in the gallery, and it was almost full. So that was pretty cool too.
There's definitely some other good news that I heard. What are some of the ones that really just that we didn't want to see pass that died last night? Diana, do you know of any of those that happened?
Yes, there were so many beautiful deaths. Some of the ones to highlight were, first of all, HB 1171, which Progress Texas, you know, all across our social media and emails we talked to folks about, because it's so ridiculous. It's an anti-abortion bill that would have led courts appoint guardian ad litems or attorneys for fetuses. And we've already talked about how ridiculous that sounds to have an attorney for a fetus. I don't know why it makes me think of like a tiny attorney with a little suitcase. But some other ones that died were HB 1399. This was also another beautiful death because that would have banned gender-affirming life-saving healthcare for trans kids. Can't believe that was one of the many bills that are, extremist legislators focused on, but really glad to see that go. And one last one was HB 4507, and that one would have allowed the state to circumvent the Voting Rights Amendment and other federal voting protections. And I mean, we're already dealing with SB 7, so to deal with one less anti-voter suppression law is a really great win.
You know that the attorneys for fetuses bill that died last night, not only was that a completely ridiculous bill, but this is probably a good time to remind people that like migrant children at the border do not get attorneys.
Yes.
Yet here, Republicans wanted to have a state or a court-appointed attorney for a fetus. It goes to it speaks volumes at how ridiculous the legislature is, how ineffective it is, and how everything's motivated by ideology and not policy.
And just taking that bill to its logical conclusion, it makes no sense. In effect, it would make no sense. How does the attorney consult with their client? They can't. This bill, it was just another way to continue the stigma surrounding abortion, and specifically to attack teens who are seeking abortions. That's all this bill was about.
Well, glad it died for now. Any of these things that die can come back as amendments to other bills. So they're not completely dead until the legislature's ended, but they are dead for now, which is worth celebrating. Or as Wesley said yesterday, what was the exact quote you said yesterday, Wesley? It's a terrible session.
I know what you're talking about.
It's like,
it's been a really bad session when hundreds of bills dying is cause for celebration.
And apparently cause for barking too.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's true.
I did hear about some other kind of nonsense stuff happening at the Capitol. I'm not sure if it was this week or last week, but of the procedural things that happened, there's also kind of like backdoor like revenge politics happening. I heard there was something that went on with the trans kids in sports bill, or trans kids in getting gender affirming care. Is that right?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that, Amanda. So this was actually on Friday of last week. And it was a big shocker to a lot of folks, especially folks who work on LGBTQ rights, because Senate Bill 29, which is, one of many transphobic bills that have been moving through the legislature this session, it actually died a few weeks ago. It made it to the House Public Education Committee, and it received a vote and it wasn't passed through. And this bill is one that would ban transgender youth athletes from participating in sports. And so the bill was effectively dead. We thought, we all celebrated the fact that it had died. There are other trans bills that we're now working to defeat. But because the day before, Representative Harold Dutton, who is the chair of the House Public Education Committee, one of his bills did not receive enough votes to pass. He was being petty, and he brought this bill back up in his committee for a vote. And it was basically just to take revenge on his colleagues who weren't supportive of the legislation that he was trying to pass the day before. And so he brought the bill up for a vote, and it ended up passing through his committee. Because this is SB 29, it's a Senate bill. This bill has already passed through the Senate. It wasn't one of the bills that had to meet the deadline last night from the House. And so it can still go to the full House for a vote. And if it is voted and moved forward, this bill could become law. All because a legislator was mad that one of his bills didn't pass. A Democrat who should be on the side of trans kids took revenge and used trans kids as a political pawn, which they are not. This is about rights.
So, Ed, what are kind of the consequences of legislators doing these kind of shady tactics and revenge politics?
Well, it's going to cost him within his caucus. Harold Dutton is a guy who went to a runoff election against a phantom candidate in the last election. Somebody had filed an unknown candidate in the primary, and he had several primary challengers, but these primary challengers were enough to keep him from getting a majority and winning his nomination again. And one of them was a phantom candidate, literally a candidate that nobody knew. He went into a runoff. He eventually won the nomination again, but this is going to be a problem for him, because not only did he bring this up again, but the exact quote he used was that my bill that was killed affected more children than this bill. So as a consequence, he used that phrase, as a consequence, I will move Senate Bill 29 to be substituted. As substituted, be reported favorably to the House. We have a blog on this that I think Abby wrote this week.
Yes.
We've got that in the comments, and if you're listening on the podcast, it'll be in the show notes.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I think the consequence is that he's going to have to explain this to his voters, and I don't know that very many Democrats are going to come to his defense on this. I know that I wouldn't. I can't think of anybody that would.
I actually, Ed, I've been super happy with the response that I've seen from his Democratic colleagues. A lot of his Democratic colleagues have called him out on this publicly. And so, one thing that we talk about in the blog is that the Democratic tent may be big, but we have to call out legislators who betray the values of equality and of human rights and of the things that this party or progressives are supposed to believe. And, I don't know how progressive Harold Dutton is. I don't know what his voters are wanting from him, but I can't see this being popular amongst his constituents. And, you mentioned the quote from him where he talked about this being a consequence of what happened the day before. Before he said that, he said, I don't know how big this problem is, and I wish I did, because I'd be in a better position to make this vote. You didn't have to make this vote. This was your decision to pull this bill back up. And you voted to move forward a bill that you didn't know enough about, and you didn't know about the people it would affect.
Can we be clear that when Wesley's saying you and your, that he's talking about Harold Dutton and not
Yeah,
me?
exactly. No, Ed, yes, definitely not you. Harold Dutton. It's an ignorant statement, and he admits his own ignorance, but then continues to move forward and push the bill forward. So, yeah.
Oh man, it's petty. And a legislator, especially somebody like Dutton, who has been there for so long, it's something that any kind of a statesman should be able to rise above. Like we don't all get what we want out of the legislature, especially when you're in the minority. And to do something like this was it was stupid, and it was mean, and it was petty. I mean, there's just, think of any demeaning description you can think of, and that's what this embodied.
Well, definitely speaking of kind of demeaning and petty things, it looks like we've got another bill heading to the governor's desk that attacks women and people who can have children. Dana, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other issues? I think SB 8 is a concern for all of us right now.
Yeah, definitely. It's a huge concern. And so this week, SB 8 had advanced the amendments. The good news is that good news that exists with it is that the amendments that were added to it by a lot of our champions, progressive champions, were agreed upon. And so the next step is that it will be signed by Governor Abbott. But something important for folks to know is that, this is an unconstitutional law. It will be an unconstitutional law once it's signed because, other laws just are similar to it in different states across the country have been met with lawsuits because they're unconstitutional, because Roe versus Wade is the law of the land still, as much as Texas would like to forget about that, and try to, put its anti-extremist agenda on all Texans. And it's honestly such a waste of energy that they put on making this a priority when they didn't make it a priority to get Texans COVID relief, to focus on that energy grid. I think that they put more energy into this than the whole state of Texas might have energy in the next crisis coming around.
It's always abortion with these people.
Don't understand why. And if it's not abortion, it's voting rights. Wes, what's on with our favorite, in quotation marks, favorite voting suppression bill, SB 7?
Right. So for any folks who have been following along with us throughout this session, you'll know that Senate Bill 7 is the massive omnibus anti-democracy voter suppression bill that's been making its way throughout the legislature. It's now been passed in both the House and the Senate, and it's waiting for changes in the conference committee. So because the bill has undergone so many changes, it has to go to a conference committee before it gets sent to Governor Abbott for his signature. So we're currently waiting to see who's going to be on that committee. They haven't even decided that yet. And once we do know who's going to be on the committee, watch out for more information from us, because we're going to be sending y'all information about what legislators to reach out to ask them to either kill this bill, make positive improvements to the bill, or to keep the positive amendments that have already been added to the bill, keep them in the bill. So that's still, we're not sure what's happening right now. We don't know who's going to be on the committee, but we do know that this bill might undergo even more changes over the next couple of weeks. So we're continuing to keep an eye on that.
And I have just dropped another link to for everybody to get caught up to where SB 7 is, see its long saga and all the things that happen behind closed doors. But I know there's some other things that kind of happened behind closed doors this week with permitless carry. Ed, do you want to talk about kind of what's going on with permitless carry in the state?
I'll tell you what little I know about it, which is that this was a bill that was so controversial that, first of all, a majority of Texans do not support this. They are not asking for this. They don't support this. They don't want this. Yet there is a fringe element in the legislature, as so often happens, that are pushing this bill. As a reminder, permitless carry is an option to purchase a gun without a gun license, without training, and you essentially have no validation as to why you can have this pistol. And they want to do away with that. It's kind of ironic, considering that the party that is so in favor of voter ID is now in favor of removing ID to get a gun. Early on, the lieutenant governor, Republican Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, said he did not see a path forward for this. He was not in favor of this. And Lieutenant Governor, who presides over the Senate, has a lot of control over this type of thing. And one of the reasons he came out and said that was because law enforcement is not in favor of permitless carry for obvious reasons, right? And apparently that was not enough. Permitless carry passed the House. Did permitless carry pass the Senate? Diana, Wesley?
Yes, so it's passed both the House and the Senate. The Senate made some changes to the bill because it was a bill that originated in the House. And the changes went back to the House to approve, and the House actually rejected the Senate's changes. So now the bill is going to, again, go to conference committee, just like with SB 7, and they're going to negotiate some terms behind closed doors. So we kind of just have to wait and see what comes out of the bill after that. But it is still overall a bill that would allow Texans to carry handguns even if they don't have a license for it.
I'm going through my Twitter feed now because I seem to remember liking something yesterday, and it said the author of the permitless carry bill had a point of order called on it and shelved the bill because of it. Or am I not remembering correctly what happened, or did something else get worked out that I maybe don't know about? Here we go. Scott Braddock from the Quorum Report says that Representative Matt Schaefer pulls down the permitless carry bill for now after a point of order from Chris Turner, who is the Democratic caucus chair.
I'm wondering if that was either a different permitless carry bill, if there might be a couple of different ones that are making their way through. I know the one that I'm talking about that has passed the House and Senate is HB 1927. And that's the one that they're saying is going behind closed doors for further negotiation. I also wonder if maybe it was a point of order on those changes that the Senate had made, but I don't know if that, Amanda, if you know more about the process, if that would make sense.
No, I would have had to been watching it live, like our lovely listeners and watchers here, to follow along with that story. But kind of talking a little bit, I want to kind of bring us back to some of the other issues that we haven't really gotten to talk a lot about. I know there's still some movement with marijuana reform in Texas. Diana, do you have any updates on that?
Yes, marijuana is on the move. And, we're not sure how far it's going to get, but all we know is that all the bills still have not gone up in smoke. yet. We have some really good ones. A few of them: House Bill 2593 and House Bill 441. Were filed by Moody, Guillen, and Rep. Zwiener, and those would include proposals that would reduce the criminal penalties for possession of marijuana. And this is, honestly just a first step. There are a lot of folks that support the decriminalization of them, of possessing marijuana, but lowering the extreme penalties that honestly exist for possessing really small amounts of marijuana is just so high. So it's really great to see that. Progress Texas has a blog on this written by our amazing legislative fellow, Victoria Guerrero, that we can share if folks want to read more about all of the bills that have made it through so far, including another one, HB 1178 by Representative Crockett, that would remove criminal penalties for possession of drug paraphernalia under the Texas Controlled Substance Act, just having paraphernalia. Again, basic things that we need to get rid of to get rid of the criminalization of marijuana in our state. So that's some really great stuff right there.
We should give a shout out to Representative Crockett as well. She's a freshman legislator from Dallas who just got elected in 2020 and came out swinging on this issue right away. Like, normally freshman legislators are kind of trying to find their way around the building and trying to get to know the process and get to know their colleagues. But Representative Crockett, I'm sorry, Diana, can you remind me what her first name is?
Jasmine Crockett? Yes.
Representative Jasmine Crockett, again, from Dallas, reached out to us early on and knew that we had a history of working on marijuana policy reform and said that she really wanted to collaborate with us and promote some of this work. And here we are with some of these bills actually passed out of committee, moving their way through the legislature, which, as we know in Texas, marijuana has been an issue that we've talked about since 2015 at length and has seen very little movement. The voters are there. They are for it. The lawmakers are just way behind the curve here, but it's good to see this happening, and it's good to see new, fresh talent like Jasmine Crockett standing up for it.
Ed, that was something that I was going to talk about too, is just a majority of Texans support these types of bills that decriminalize marijuana possession, especially for like small amounts of marijuana. And we often joke when we talk about marijuana just because it's a fun thing to joke about. Our favorite thing is to have puns. So Diana mentioned they haven't gone up in smoke. That's actually the title of the piece that we put out this
She was quite blunt about it.
But also, I think it's so important to talk about, this is a racial and criminal justice issue too. Mm-hmm. Marijuana laws, specifically here in Texas, but across the country, they disproportionately impact people of color. Black Texans are more likely to be arrested on marijuana charges and drug offenses or drug convictions for marijuana offenses create lasting effects on people's criminal record, and they have significant social and economic consequences. So these bills are serious because they would have a serious impact on criminal justice in our state and on the communities that are most impacted by these laws. And so I think these bills, we've been, like you said, we've been fighting for this for a really long time. A lot of folks within our state have been fighting for these laws for a really long time. And it's exciting to see some of these bills finally moving throughout the legislature.
To close us out, do you think Willie Nelson will be able to see legalization in Texas before we lose him?
Man, you can't say before. You're never going to lose Willie Nelson. What are you talking about?
I mean, honestly, that should be our motivation. That should be the campaign.
Do it for Willie. I think we have a new slogan. Yes. Do it for Willie.
Do it for Willie. Because if not, we're failing as a state.
Yes. There won't be any more July, 4th of July Willie Nelson parties if we don't do this for him. He should just start holding that hostage over us.
Yeah.
We should invite him on the show sometime.
Yes. Well,
I'll get
on
high
that note,
beforehand.
yeah, we'll leave that to our individual decision making.
Our
But,
producer, Chris Mosier, by the
In
way,
another
in the
state. In
chat.
another state.
Yeah.
In our private chat, our producer, Chris Mosier, puts in all caps, Willie will never die.
No.
Either way, I think that's our new campaign slogan here. We're going to do it for Willie. Definitely on that note, I wanted to thank all three of you for joining me today, for everyone who listened in, and for other people out there who are ready to go do it for Willie. Well, cheers to some old chubbing. And yeah, thanks so much for joining us this week. Have a good Friday, everybody.
Bye.
Bye,
Thanks,
all.
everyone.